Support Name Explain on Patreon for ad-free videos, exclusive podcasts and blog posts, and to help choose what names get explained. Click the link in the description. One of the more interesting and unique ways in which we convey language is with our choice of fonts. Most things tend to be written in a serious traditional font, but there's so many out there. Fonts that are more humorous or some that refer to different time periods. Go into any word processor on any computer and you can quickly find a huge list of different font options. What's of the most interest for us, of course, is the fact that all these different fonts have names. When you scroll through the various names of fonts, you'll see all sorts of odd, unique words coming up being used as their names. There are tons of different ways in which fonts are named. Take Times New Roman example, which is perhaps the most popular font out there. This is named after the UK newspaper The Times, and I guess the New Roman part of the name comes from the fact that this was a new version of the Latin/Roman script, or even Verdana, which has a name coming from verdant, which is a shade of green, and the first name of Anna, as Anna is the name of the font's creator's daughter. We, however, here on Name Explain love geography and place names, especially on a Wednesday. And luckily for us, there are quite a few fonts named after parts of the world. But what exactly connects these fonts and these places? Why are they named after them? Though before we get to explaining names, we have to do some jargon busting, as I'm sure a lot of font fanatics are pulling their hair out at the moment because I'm calling these fonts, when that isn't quite the case. The correct name for these things are typefaces, which I'm sure is a name you've heard of too. What exactly is the difference between a font and a typeface? Well, technically a typeface is what we usually call a font, that being a set of characters that have a uniform style, whereas a font I saw described as different versions of that aforementioned typeface. In example, Times New Roman is a typeface, whereas Times New Roman in bold or Times New Roman in size 12 is a font. While there is a clear difference between the two, it would seem that over time this difference has become less important, with people mislabeling typefaces as fonts so much that it's kind of just become an acceptable name to use for them. I guess the key reason as to why this has happened is because many word processors label the drop-down box for typefaces as fonts, even though this is technically referring to everything like the size and style, at least here on Apple pages anyway. As to where the names of typeface and font come from, well, typeface is clearly just a compound of type and face. Font, however, comes from more interesting roots. Font derives from the French font, meaning casting, which comes from the Latin fundere, meaning to melt /cast /pour out. This etymology dates to the earliest days of printing. When printing was first created, each character had its own stamp. These stamps would be put in the correct order and pressed to paper with some sort of ink. These stamps were originally made out of metal and would have been created by pouring metals into molds to create these stamps. It's the pouring/casting of these stamps as to how we got the word font to represent different styles of writing. Since these early days of printing, fonts have come a long way. We no longer need to smelt stamps and press them to paper. We can create words by easily pressing some buttons that then appear on our screen. This ease of writing has led to a huge influx of new fonts, with many of them of course being named after parts of the world. That's the whole point of this video. What's interesting is that many of these fonts named after parts of the world were all named by one group of people, with that group of people having a woman called Susan Kare at the helm. In 1983, she was hired by Apple as a graphics designer for their computers. One of her main tasks was to create a series of fonts for the computers to use. As well as designing what these fonts looked like, she and her team also had to give them all names too. Susan and her team wanted all these fonts to have names that are linked together, or as she described it, attractive related names. Someone else in her team was a man called Andy Hertzfeld. These two were actually old high school friends, both from suburban Philadelphia. This meant that they were both acutely aware of Philly's local commuter trains and had memories of riding them. In ode to these school term memories, they named all their newly created fonts after stops on this train, giving the fonts names like Overbrook, Marion, Ardmore, and Rosemont. However, if you look at a list of fonts now, you probably won't see these names, and that's because a certain someone at Apple asked if they could be changed. That being Steve Jobs. Jobs liked the idea of fonts being named after places, but instead of local places in Philly, he wanted them to be named after world-class cities, as he put it. And from Steve's suggestion, the fonts names were changed to things like Chicago, New York, London, Athens, and perhaps most popular to this day, Geneva. These city names were chosen as the city's style reflected the look of the fonts, e.g. the London font is very old English looking. It was thanks to Susan Kerr's initial idea and Steve Jobs' tweak as to how the ball started rolling on fonts being named after places. While Susan and Steve's decisions explain why there are so many fonts named after cities, this isn't the only reason as to why there are fonts named after parts of the world. Font names have expanded too, to not only be named after cities, but entire nations as well. The best example of this has to be with Helvetica, which for so long was the standard font for iPhones and other Apple products. Interestingly enough, they changed from Helvetica to a font called San Francisco, another place name based font. Anyway, back to Helvetica. As I said, this is a font named after an entire country, except if you were to look on a modern map, you wouldn't find a state with that name. In Europe, however, you will find the nation of Switzerland. Switzerland in Latin is known as Helvetia/Helvetica, with this name deriving from a local tribe of people the Romans encountered in these lands, who they named the Helvetii. Helvetica was first created all the way back in 1957, so way before Susan's city fonts. First off though, it was called New Haas Glostech, a name that isn't quite as catchy, that's for sure. 3 years later, however, in 1960, another company started to use this font, and they were the ones to give it the name Helvetica. It was thought that this name would play better in a global market. I imagine this had to do with how Switzerland is perceived around the world as a country of high quality products, so a font named after their Latin name must be pretty high quality too. It seems to have worked out, as to this day, Helvetica is one of the most beloved fonts on our planet. It seems you can't mention Helvetica without mentioning Arial, another deeply popular font, which is actually seen by many as Helvetica's cheap imitator. The name Arial doesn't come from any part of the world. In fact, I can't find anywhere telling me where this name came from exactly. If you happen to know, then please do tell me down below. So why am I mentioning it here then? Well, this is because, like with Helvetica, another company started to use this font and applied a different name to it. In this case, that other company was IBM. While they used the font, they were unable to license that name of Arial, so instead gave the font a name of their own, that being Sonoran Sans Serif. This name derived from the Sonoran Desert in Arizona, as it's in this desert where IBM's manufacturing factory was located at the time. So Arial does have a name that relates to a place, it's just the font's far less known of name. One of the strangest stories as to how a font got its name has to go to Georgia, one of the preferred fonts of the publishing world. While yes, Georgia is a given name, it is also a place name too. In fact, there are two places named Georgia that will come to mind for most people, I imagine: the nation of Georgia and the state of Georgia in the USA. This font is named after the latter of these two Georgias. How this font came to be named after the Peach State is a rather strange story, that's for sure. This font was created in 1993 by famous designer Matthew Carter and was inspired by fonts and typefaces of various written texts like books and, more specifically, newspapers. It was one specific headline of a newspaper that really inspired this font. This was a tabloid headline that read, "Alien Heads Found in Georgia." Yep, not making that up. Despite how silly this headline was, the writing used in the headline was the key inspiration behind the font. In ode to this headline, the font's name was borrowed from it. Why they went with Georgia is beyond me, however. A font called Alien Head would be far cooler. Perhaps they went with Georgia because of that well-established naming convention of fonts being named after parts of the world. Georgia's creator Matthew Carter made many well-known fonts. Also created the aforementioned Verdana, as well as another font by the name of Tahoma. Tahoma is yet another place name based font, being derived from the Native American name for Mount Rainier. This mountain is close to the city of Seattle, which seems to be why the font was named after it, as Carter seems to have been based there at some point. There's a font out there, however, named after something larger than any city or nation, and that's a font named after the largest ocean on our planet. Pacifico isn't the most well known of fonts, but it's one I deeply enjoy. This font's design is deeply inspired by the surfer culture of California and the USA's West Coast in general. This West Coast, of course, belongs to the Pacific Ocean, hence why it was named after this huge ocean that is so heavily linked with surfers. The main reason I love this font so much, however, is due to my own personal use of it. In fact, if you're a fan of my channel, you'll see it pretty often, as it's the font I use for the Name Explain logo. Anyway, that's enough about my own font preferences. What we can see from this is font names can really be inspired by any part of the world, whether those places be small local train stations beloved by school friends, world-class cities that give your fonts a touch of class, or even a font named after the largest body of water on our planet. Next time you're choosing a font, why not think about where its name may have come from? Or just choose Comic Sans and watch the world burn. Places named after fonts were suggested by Kevin Eager, and thanks to their suggestion, they will now be honoured as Name Explain's patron saint of places named after fonts. Do you have a good idea for somewhere that's name could be covered in a Name Explain video? If so, then please consider donating on Patreon. Just $1 a month helps keep the channel running and earns you a weekly chance to suggest somewhere to be turned into a video, and you too could be a Name Explain Patreon saint. Thank you to all my patrons who support Name Explain on a monthly basis. Patreon is vital to Name Explain, and donating just $2 a month allows you to enjoy ad-free videos and bonus Patreon exclusive content. It also allows you to help choose what names get explained in upcoming videos, and gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you so much for all the support you guys give Name Explain. Thank you so much for reaching the end of the video. Check out another video and subscribe to stay in the loop on all things Name Explain. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT, and also join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain, both of which will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.